once I was a consultant. For a time I had a private practice, and I would see the well-heeled of Wellington, people from the diplomatic circles and so forth. And these are people who had plenty of money and plenty of motivation, some of the most highly successful individuals in society who had control over everything in their world. They were used to managing themselves in all sorts of tricky situations, and they had plenty of money to spend on personal trainers, gyms, buying a dog and healthy food. And their problems were exactly the same. They would come along and they'd get all enthusiastic about losing weight. They're determined to do so. Sometimes they would. I mean, usually they would for a short time. And then they would be back to where they were. And I was thinking, crikey, this isn't a matter of motivation. This isn't a matter of encouragement. There's something sort of hardwired here that, we just can't change.
Kia ora, I'm Sasha Borissenko and this is Chewing the Facts, a podcast about fatness in Aotearoa. In this episode, Genetics Loads the Gun, I'm going to explore the physiology around weight gain. Why do some people gain weight more than others? Is there more to the story than calories in, calories out?
It wasn't a thing when I was a child, but of course when I became a teenager, then that just entered into the dieting years, and you just start dieting and that's it, you are dieting for life.
I went through periods where I would do exercise 3 times a day, and I'd try and diet and I would lose a little bit of weight, but I really wouldn't lose much.
Do you think food rules your life?
It does. It really does. It's a strange thing to admit, to confess to.
I tried so many diets for so many years. And part of my problem was I started dieting in the early 70s based on the best medical knowledge. And it was utterly wrong. Utterly wrong.
Here's diabetes specialist Robin Tumith. She penned the book Fat Science, Why Diets and Exercise Don't Work. And after campaigning the government to take action for 14 years, she called it quits in 2015.
I mean, I can remember being accosted at a conference, and I was talking about these aspects of diet contributing to obesity, and a woman came up to me and she was kind of very irritable with my stance, and she's saying, well, look, I go for a walk every day, and we grow our own vegetables, and we don't let our children eat this stuff and all that sort of jazz. And she was slim, and she was sort of saying that their behaviours determined their slimness. And I said to her, oh, so your parents obese? And she went, oh, no, they weren't obese. She hadn't fought the obesity genes. She just followed along the trajectory that had been handed to her, and she was lucky that they were, she had slim parents,
Robin raises a pretty confronting proposition that firstly, diets don't work, which for anyone who's gone on a diet, that's a pretty hard pill to swallow. We'll be exploring this idea later on in the series. There's also the reality that everyone knows someone in their lives that can either eat whatever they like, whenever they like, and stay lean. We also know people that can have the most optimum of diets known to man and aren't lean. Could it be due to our genetic and physiological makeup? Here's Professor Greg Anderson of the University of Otago.
Clearly there's huge differences. And it can't simply be explained by the fact that some people choose to go to the gym and others don't. There's a lot more to it than that. There is our energy intake and there is our energy output. Pretty simple equation, and obviously some people put on weight because their energy intake exceeds their energy output. That's the simple answer. But it hasn't got us anywhere in terms of, we've known that forever. The fact is that some people are driven to have a bigger energy intake, not through their choosing, but they have a biological drive to eat more. I have a dog at home, and I can just leave her food dish full of food. She can eat ad lib, and she'll never get fat because she's just not that interested in eating. But if you have a Labrador, they're always giving you the hound dog eyes. They want food all the time. Labradors, it turns out, have a small mutation in one gene. It's called a POMC gene, And that mutation makes them really want to eat more than my dog does.
So we see this in animals. And humans are more complex than dogs, of course. Research suggests there could be up to 400 genes that come into play. Only a handful of those appear to be major players, though. Even metabolism is driven by how genes are expressed. But back to Greg.
We all talk about going to the gym, going for a run. Actually, that's a relatively small component. Let me try and quantify it. If I was to go for a 10-kilometre run, that's a pretty decent run, I would burn off about the amount of energy as there is in a donut or a Big Mac, about 500 calories or 2,000 kilojoules in metric units. So, okay, that's worthwhile being able to burn that off, but actually that's, some people could have the equivalent of a donut or a Big Mac at every meal, and they're not going to go for a 10-kilometre run, 3 10-kilometre runs every day. So actually, we don't really burn off all the energy that we're taking in. We don't burn it off just from going for a run or from exercise. Most of it is burnt off just from the day-to-day existence, keeping our heart ticking over, keeping our blood pumping, keeping the muscles supplied with energy. That's where most of our energy is burnt up.
Must you jump in a car to go a few blocks? Walk instead. Saves gasoline, too. Try parking a distance from work or school and walking the rest of the way. On a date, go dancing instead of to a movie. Remember, when you get off your duff and do something, you're beginning to exercise.
So genetically speaking, some people burn off excess energy easily when they're sleeping or sitting still. That's because they've got a greater resting metabolic rate, which means they just burn energy faster. Research shows we're designed to gain weight as we age too, but it's not as much as you'd think. A huge study combining 40 years of data and 6,500 people from 29 countries found that up until the age of 1, calorie burning is at its peak. Between 1 and 20, metabolism slows by about 3% a year. From 20 to 60, it holds steady for both men and women. And after 70, it declines by about 0.7% a year. The 80 co-authors expected metabolism would slow for women in their 40s with the onset of menopause. But that didn't happen.
Frustrating, but inevitable for most people. It's middle-age spread.
The study also found we don't have a good handle on how body size affects metabolism. Using BMI, which we know is problematic, the study found there isn't a constant rate of energy expenditure per pound. In other words, it's not about calories in, calories out. It reinforced that the more weight you're carrying, the more energy you're using. What that means is, the heavier you are, the more calories you're burning. Okay, moving on. Genes, tick. Metabolism, tick. Let's look at the brain and the role of hormones.
Hormones, they're giving information to the brain about what the status of your body is like. The most famous example is a hormone called leptin. It's made by fat, and so leptin comes from a Greek word, leptos, it means thin.
In 1994, after a decade of work, Friedman and his collaborators homed in on a gene only found in fat cells.
And in that instant, I knew that we had identified the gene that makes a hormone and that plays a very active role in regulating appetite, metabolism, and probably other biological systems.
And the idea is that when you start to accumulate a lot of fat, it makes a lot of this hormone leptin. That sends a signal to your brain saying, got a lot of fat around here, we don't need to eat anymore for a while. And so it lowers your appetite. And so when this was discovered, just coming up 30 years ago now, it was named leptin because the idea is the hormone makes you thin by reducing your appetite. Well, over the last 30 years, we've learned that there's a lot more nuance, and it's just not quite that simple. And in particular, if you have a lot of leptin, which obese people have, the brain stops seeing it and you actually become resistant to its
So we
effects.
thought we had a handle on leptin, but actually we don't. This has happened during my lifetime. It shows there's still a lot to learn about the role of fat.
There are other hormones which we are increasingly realizing that they're important as well. Some of them come from the gut. And so as food is passing through the large intestine, there are small peptide hormones, small hormones that are released there, and they send information back to your brain about food passing through the gut. It's possibly one of the reasons why bariatric surgery is successful, because the food might just be bypassing the stomach, where it usually sits around for a long time, and getting to the gut quicker and releasing these hormones much more quickly. So you get almost instant feedback after eating a meal that curbs your appetite.
We'll be looking at bariatric surgery, which alters the stomach and food digestion in episode 5. But first, what about the types of food we're eating? Cue sugar, salt and fat, the traditional baddies in society's pursuit for thinness. It's not that simple to blame one or the other. It's how they're used, combined and marketed that makes them taste so good.
They're also acting on reward centers in our brain that trigger reward mechanisms that we find extraordinarily pleasing when we eat those things. And so it wants to make us eat more than we want.
If you too crave Oreo cookies, you're in good company. We all have our little strategies, of course. Twist them apart, eat the filling first, but feed them to rats. That's what researchers at Connecticut College did, and they found that when eating Oreos, the pleasure centers in the little guy's brains lit up as much or even more than on cocaine. And yes, by the way, the rats ate the filling first.
There are circuits in the brain which are responsive to sugar and fat, and they are dopamine neurons, so they do release dopamine. And the combination, cream donut, my goodness, it just hits all the right buttons, doesn't it? And so it becomes addictive. And so even though there's nothing in our body telling us we need some more energy, nevertheless we have it because it looks so good. And, you know, we all know that if we were out in the country where there's no bakery or cake shop and we were doing stuff to keep us busy, we probably wouldn't miss those things. But when we know that that cake shop is just around the corner, it's extraordinarily difficult not to go there. So that's the addiction side of things.
We have to be careful here. Addiction is used in the loosest sense of the word. There have been sweeping headlines that sugar can be just as addictive as narcotics, but it's not so simple.
Well, as you have probably heard, a teaspoon of sugar helps the medicine go down, but a recent medical commentary warns that the sweet stuff could be as addictive as heroin.
The hormones that are released when I eat a slice of red velvet cake with a 50-50 ratio of cake to icing are the same hormones that are released when I cling on to my nephew, who just so happens to be a cutie pie Welsh Springer Spaniel. Come here, boy. Give me a smooch. Loose links were made between sugar and hyperactivity in kids in the mid-70s. Then, in 1994, scientists tested kids whose parents described them as being sensitive to sugar. Some were given placebos, tests were made, and it found sugar didn't affect children's behaviours or cognitive functions at all. Sugar is, however, rotting people's teeth.
To make up a good day's food for a working man, we must select some of each group to give a balanced diet. Fresh milk covers 2 groups, and he should have a pint of it, some green vegetables and an orange or a tomato. Then plenty of cheese or meat, and from the energy foods, bread, potatoes, sugar, and butter or margarine. Pastries, scones, and other appetizing foods are cheap sources of energy as well. But for the growing child, in proportion, he needs more of the bodybuilding and protective foods and less of the energy foods. Too much sweet stuff may spoil his appetite and cut down the money left for his mother to buy green stuff, cheese, milk, fruit and meat, which are more expensive, but will keep him healthy and help him to grow properly.
But on a nutritional level, not all food is made equal. Enter the world of ultra-processed foods. Here's Dr. Francesco Branca. He's the Director of Nutrition, Health and Development at the World Health Organization.
We have defined a new category of products called ultra-processed food. You can have processed food, bread, for example, which is processed food, but it's a simple level of processing. It's done by manufacturer. That's processing. The ultra-processing is to produce a vast array of products which are appealing for their palatability, but are definitely high in fat, sugar, and salt. Very heavily marketed. They are affordable by many people. They're cheap. They have a very long shelf life. You can find it everywhere. You can eat it at any time of day and night. You maybe have it in a machine that is distributing it. Some people indicate that there are some other characteristics of those products that make them, less healthy. For example, the amount of additive. So the complexity of the ingredients is lost in the ultra-processed food processing. So you get, the negative element and you lack also the positive element.
So it's not the sugar and fat, it's what's added to it, or taken out to make it last longer. This distorted combination also tastes yum. It's cheap and appeals to everyone. Food is hard to talk about. Bad food, junk food, garbage food. There's a sense of sin or shame that's attached to it. Research shows this pressure distorts our drive to eat. Pressuring kids to eat foods that are good for them has been associated with lower fruit and vegetable intake. In 2006, a group of scientists told one group of kids, here's some soup, here's some dessert. Eat it however you like, as much as you like. Another group was told you've got to finish the soup before you can have the dessert. The latter group didn't like the soup as much and ate less of it. Back to Dr. Branca from the WHO.
Definitely, if we understand the health impact of certain foods, we know that at least the food which are not contributing to a healthy diet should be consumed very sparingly.
But once upon a time, we're not supposed to be having any fat, and now we are allowed fat. I mean, if it's changing dramatically from a World Health Organization point of view, what's to say that what we currently have is up for debate?
I think you're raising the point of, do we change understanding of our what is healthy and what is not healthy, and then do we change our recommendation in time? We're a science-based organization, so we continuously look at the science and the evidence around food, nutrients, and there are some updates. But by and large, there's been a constant recommendation. Total fat needs to be kept under control because, a diet which is too high in fat, over 35-40%, it can easily lead to overconsumption. The story of total fat, at some point, and this was, in the 60s, particularly in the US, there was this association between heart disease and fat consumption. Then the response was, okay, fat is a problem, so we reduce fat and whatever else is correct. And that was a mistake. So you had low-fat products that had a high content of free sugars. So the problem was not the recommendation of fat. The problem was the absence of a recommendation of free sugars. Now, I think we're able to say, well, you can't reduce the fat and then increase the sugars.
The label says 99% fat-free. If we didn't tell you, you'd never know.
So no processed foods that are high in sugar and high in fat. Again, there's this idea of personal choice. Greg Anderson has thoughts on this.
It is about regulation in terms of appetite, but I want to stress that that's the simple answer. And if you just say that, it always throws it back on people's free will. And the free will is not the same for every person. So if we think about what the situation was like maybe 500 years ago, There weren't supermarkets around, so food was often scarce, and perhaps it was a feast or famine. You know, there was a harvest, or hunters were successful or something like that. There's a lot of food, and then we go through some very lean times. That's the kind of environment, apart from the super rich, which were in the minority, most of the people that were contributing to our gene pool lived in this pretty lean environment. You wouldn't plan ahead and say, on Monday, gee, I'm going to be working all day with the wheat harvest. On Tuesday, I've got to dig the ground for the potatoes. Wednesday, we're likely to have to fight off the Vikings. Rest of the week, I've got nothing in my diary, but there won't be any food anyway because of the Viking invasion. I'd better eat big this weekend in preparation for that. There's just going to be no time to eat. You don't think that way. But you imagine in that feast or famine environment, if you had a gene that unconsciously made you overeat a bit when there was food available, that would be a good thing, because when the famine came, you would have some stored body fat. And now we come to 2023, we've all got those genes, but instead we're in an environment where energy-dense food is always available just around the corner at the supermarket. So we find ourselves biologically driven to eat more than we need. Our body hates it when we get even a little bit low on body fat. There's not much of that hormone leptin being made, and our body screams for more food. We're just driven, we're wired that way, but some more than others because of these genes.
We've got more political reckonings on the obesity debate after National Leader Judith Collins yesterday doubled down, saying obesity isn't an epidemic, and it is time that people took personal responsibility. The issue's gathered some pace on the campaign trail. Winston Peters says there's a tsunami of obesity problems coming our way.
And our health system faces a nightmare unless we get going right here and right now to do something about it.
And here's Ardern on the matter.
It does tell you that on one of the most significant health issues we have, you'll see nothing from the opposition on it.
Dr. Shane Retty is National's health spokesman, and he joins us now. Do you agree, Shane, with your leader that obesity is an issue of personal responsibility?
Oh, good morning, Kate. Good to speak with you. Yes, I do. I think the state has a role to play in this clearly, and I think that role is to set up a framework with a menu of choices. And with each choice, people can know the advantages and disadvantages, but then it's their personal responsibility which choice they take.
So is it, as Judith says, a personal weakness, obesity?
It's a personal choice. People have a choice of one option over another. A personal weakness, well, that's up to the individual itself.
So bear with me. It's genes, brain signals, metabolism, and hormones working in unison in response to survive. Hilariously, this strikes me as ironic, as once upon a time, fatness was seen as a sign of wealth. And just look at the divine right of kings, for example. There's this evolutionary superiority in a way. But something flipped in the 20th century. Here's Boyd Swinburne. He's a professor of population nutrition and global health at the University of Auckland.
As part of my training as a diabetes doctor, I went to the US to do some research, and we were doing research with a group of North American Indians, the Pima Indians, who have the highest rate of diabetes in the world. And so there was a whole lot of studies asking why they have such obesity and diabetes. And I was there, and we're doing all these fancy metabolic studies and looking inside the body at their hormones and their genes and all of the markers inside the body, trying to understand what is causing obesity and diabetes. But it was when I kind of went down to the reservation that some pennies started dropping. That population, like a lot of indigenous populations that have been colonized, have been marginalized from society, a hell of a lot of poverty that you can just see on the streets. And the problems that they were having were the diseases of poverty, not just the diabetes and obesity, but alcoholism and violence and all of those things. So it seemed to me that we were looking in the wrong place for the causes, for trying to find the pathology. We thought the pathology was inside the body, whereas I thought the pathology is in the environment.
Boyd came to the conclusion that fatness is a typical physiological response to the environment that's changed. He coined the term obesogenic environment. The focus is often on what fat people are eating or how often they're exercising. But when we look closer at the data, it's pretty consistent across the board, irrespective of weight. In a 2004 study, for example, only 9 to 12% of the total sample of 11,000 people had a good diet. Poor diets ranged from 17 to 19% among normal weight, overweight, and obese subjects. Poor diets were higher among people with a higher BMI, but the difference was, quote, not statistically significant.
So the genetics is part of the story, and so if people are in an obesogenic environment and they're exposed to the same environment, then the genetics will play some part in how much the obesity is expressed. So everybody will gain a bit of weight. As our society becomes more obesogenic, we all kind of gain a little bit of weight, but some people gain much more than others. It's very easy to become obese in a country like New Zealand. You know, you just have to eat what's on offer, eat what's advertised, what's freely available, what's on special at the supermarkets and things. You become obese, no worries about that at all. It's easy. It requires quite a lot of effort not to be.
I'm a millennial. Growing up in Tauranga, a beach town in the North Island, I have fond memories of $1 lolly mixtures and Bubble Bill ice creams from the local dairy, swapping odd bods collectible cards that came free in those mini chip packets designed for school lunches. I've never known anything different. To find answers, I spoke to Sasha Borissenko, a molecular biologist who has been working in communicable diseases for 20 years. Lynette grew up when ultra-processed food was globalised in the 70s and 80s. She's also my mum.
All right, let's go back. So how would you describe the lay of the land growing up, and maybe if you timestamp it?
So I grew up in the 60s and 70s in California. I was the child of immigrants, so my parents, and they were also children of immigrants. So my childhood was my mother did all the cooking. And we had packed lunches, but not like the Americans. We weren't allowed Twinkies or Ding Dongs or Yo-Hos, which we really wanted. And I had a thing about I always wanted the raisins in the little wee boxes because my mother would just buy raisins or whatever in bulk, and it would be wrapped up in wax paper. And I had my sandwich in wax paper. And I wanted the nice plastic bags that the American kids had.
Hello there, young man.
It's King Ding Dong. King who? Ding Dong. Don't you see him? No. But the Hostess Ding Dongs.
Hostess Ding Dongs, fruit pies and Twinkies. With Hostess, tasting is believing.
I mean, growing up, did you notice there was an influx in this type of food?
Yes. And we wanted it. When the TV dinners came in, that was magical. To have your food in little compartments, and we had card tables and little TV dinner trays, and to eat in the living room was also special.
3 pieces of batter-dipped chicken, fried crisp and golden, fluffy whipped potatoes, tender sweet vegetables, and apple cake cobbler for dessert. What's your guess? About $2? $2.50? Wrong. It's about 85 cents, and it's a Swanson.
But you weren't allowed these box dinners, these TV dinners.
It was a rare event. It was a very special event, once or twice a year maybe.
I mean, I've had them now and I find them disgusting.
Yes, but at the time it was pretty exciting. You have to remember, my mother's cooking was pretty much every meal had boiled potatoes, and I mean just boiled. So they were boiled and drained. There was no salt. I don't recall there being any pepper in my childhood. No. And the butter was used sparingly. So there was you had to butter and mash your own potatoes. Things improved very much when my mother discovered the can of mushroom soup. And therefore we had the grey meat swimming in the mushroom soup. But it was, it was a tasty improvement.
Well, would you describe your parents as pretty affluent?
No, I think they were middle class. My mother was a stay-at-home mom until we were probably teenagers. I think I have some very happy memories of food as a child. There was a lot of fruit trees. We had apple trees and peach trees. We had a cherry tree. All this beautiful fruit immobilized in jelly for the party, in a Tupperware mold. So I do have a lot of happy memories. And that food was a much more family thing. When my mother was doing all of her canning and we all sat down and we all had to peel apples and we had to peel peaches. And when she discovered spaghetti and meatballs, I can remember spending hours and hours rolling up meatballs because, of course, she was doing the batch thing, food for 1,000 in the freezer. So, but it's quite hard to go back to those memories or try in the current environment, the time to do a garden or the time to do batch cooking. I don't have fruit trees growing. All these things require effort and time and effort.
And so how would you describe immigrating to New Zealand and kind of the food landscape?
Yeah, no, I really loved the food when we first came here, except for the cheese, the 3 cheeses. Tasty, Colby, and mild. That was unfortunate.
So what, that was 1989, so it was...
Early 1990s.
Early 1990s, so it was before the borders opened up in terms of globalisation, right?
Well, when we moved to Christchurch, still only small shops. Within 5 years, we were living in Auckland and there were many new grocery stores. So that was kind of a magical time when there weren't large grocery stores. There were many things that were much better then than now.
There's a sense of nostalgia when my mum talks about the past, but were things that much better? Here's Waikato University's Dr. Rebecca Graham. She's an expert in food insecurity.
So when we think about what happened in New Zealand, particularly in the 80s and the 90s, we had deregulation, we had Ruth Richardson and the mother of all budgets, we had Rogernomics. And so together, those approaches really fast-track neoliberalism in New Zealand.
I believe the 1990s will be New Zealand's decade. The decade in which we rediscover the energy and self-confidence of old. The decade in which we become a true enterprise society. The decade in which our business people discover they can take on and beat the rest of the world. The decade in which we cease to think of ourselves as a poor, struggling country and begin to think of ourselves once more as winners.
As well, around those times with the deregulation and the selling of state-owned enterprises, a number of communities were driven into poverty overnight. And some of our smaller communities, everyone lost their jobs overnight, boom. The welfare was insufficient. The welfare was deliberately set at 20% less than what was needed for people to survive as a way to incentivise people to get off welfare.
I have to preface this episode by saying growing up, I was pretty privileged. I mean, I was one of those girls who did ballet, come on. But even with all of our family's advantages, the food environment still had an impact on my mum's choices around food and views of the types of food.
The other thing was that I was always a working mother. And so I think I look back and I feel really guilty about a lot of the foods that I put in your lunches. And I didn't think I was doing a bad thing by giving you little bottles of yogurt, but I didn't realize that they had a lot of sugar in them. And, there were some muesli bars which they would say they had so much protein in them, but they didn't mention how much sugar was in them. So, you did have sandwiches. Certainly fruit always had a ride to school and back.
So you were saying about you feel guilty about it. There must be this sense of, especially if you're a working mother, the convenience of having these kind of prepackaged foods offers a great outlet.
Well, you do know about the dinners as well. My friend Maggi Mix. So with 3 children, and I was busy driving you even after school. So, sometimes we had to have convenient food.
Time poor.
Yeah, time poor. Yes, I think I wish I had done better. Yeah, I think I could have done better. I really dislike all the articles that you see in the newspaper and the little clips on television where there's somebody telling you how they feed their children for, $50 a week, and they basically spend their weekends doing large batches and freezing them, and I find that really annoying. Yeah. I've never been able to do the batch cooking.
To complicate matters further, deregulation in the 80s and 90s saw an influx of fancy marketing and some very persuasive advertising, and this sweet-toothed kid and busy mum lapped it up along with the rest of the country. Here's Akant Veer, a marketing professor at the University of Canterbury.
So if you look at some of the marketing, especially around the 80s and 90s, where more people were working, we had more women working and less women at home, for example, the supermarkets in the UK, in particular in New Zealand, follow suit, were advertising, this is the way you get to be a good wife and a good mum without doing maximum effort. Just you're able to grab these processed meals, prepare a delicious home-baked meal without making you think about, well, actually, they're full of salt. That's why they taste good. They're full of sugar. That's why it tastes good. All this stuff that you are now passively feeding your family because you're drawing on the psychology of, I want to be a good mum or I want to be a good wife. This is a way that you can make your family stronger and happier. And those are sort of motivations that marketers would really play on early on, both for dads and mums, especially when it comes to kids, to encourage the consumption of this sort of stuff.
Oxford Street in London, Britain's top place to go shopping, and amidst all the smart stores, the newest sort of place to eat. Fast food centres like this are just starting to spring up on high streets all over the country. Rival firms are spending millions battling for the best, most expensive sites. In the burger boom, the gamble is that Britain will go for fast food in a big way, with its quick service, tasty meals, lack of fuss, and clean, smart surroundings.
It's very hard to describe the change in the food environment without blaming people for what they eat in the process. It's also difficult not to undermine people's ability to make choices. Then again, we can only choose from what's directly available to us. And what happens when heaps of the information we see is just advertising and food labels that can sometimes be really tricky to understand. In any event, where's the accountability around the changes to the food environment? And what's being done about it? I'll be looking more into this in episodes 3, 8, and 9, so stay tuned for more. For now, I'll leave you with Dr. Francesco Branca from the World Health Organization. So would you say that, quote unquote, the obesity epidemic is the result of the failure of the free market?
Definitely, food systems have failed to basically do their job in feeding people in the right way. We have a lot of people with food insecurity. We have a lot of obese people. So there is clearly a fundamental problem. So food systems have maybe evolved following other objectives. Food as commodities, food system as a source of income, but not really to address people's health and nutrition needs.
I'm Sasha Borissenko, and that was episode 2 of Chewing the Facts. It was written, directed, and produced by me. Executive producer was Teresa Cowie from Connect Content. Post-production and sound design was by Oliver Devlin. Theme music by Thomas Lambert. With special thanks to Andrew Laxon, Ethan Sills, and many more. Follow Chewing the Facts on iHeartRadio or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on TikTok and the gram at Chewing the Facts NZ. New episodes are out every Sunday. This podcast was made in collaboration with the New Zealand Herald with support by New Zealand On Air. In the next episode, I'll be chewing the facts around food insecurity and the effect of colonisation on communities in Aotearoa.
South Auckland is a food desert. You look at the preventable diseases which plague the poorest of our communities, Māori Pacific and actually Indian. It's not hard to connect the dots. Our systems are creating environments which are lowering our life expectancy, like it literally killing us.